Hello, this is Father David, here with day 6 of the Lenten spring. We've almost gotten through our first whole week of Great Lent. We're here on the Souls Saturday. At St. Anthony's, we'll celebrate a Souls Saturday liturgy, and that is where we remember the departed and ask for God to give them a dwelling place in paradise. And that liturgy is for all of the departed. The connection to paradise, of course, being the theme of this chapter for today. Outside the gates of paradise. This is, of course, we're still working through a lot of the themes that technically came prior to Great Lent. Of course, the time I'm recording this will be we've just done it, and we've just sung these words, and this is the theme of, it's often called Cheese Fair Sunday. It's got several names. It's also Forgiveness Sunday. But the liturgical theme is the expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise, from the Garden of Eden. And this is the theme that we hear about. And Father Thomas really just launches right into it with several hymns in this chapter. It's mostly hymns from the Vespers on Saturday night. And I don't blame him. They're some of the most poignant hymns that we have. Truly, they give me pause every year. Perhaps the only one that surpasses it are some of them on Holy Friday. But we mentioned yesterday, when we talked about the waters of Babylon and sitting down in exile, singing the songs of our God in a foreign land. Well, how do we remember Zion? Well, we have to keep paradise. And more than just that, paradise as it will be again before our minds and our hearts. So the story of Adam and Eve, Father Thomas kind of, you can tell it bothered him. And he says, this story of Adam and Eve, it's made fun of, dismissed, you see it on Hallmark cards. People make jokes about it. Comedians, how do otherwise intelligent people believe in two naked people and a talking snake? And the point of it is not whether or not something happened physically, chronologically, exactly like that, in time and space. For Orthodox Christians, that ultimately is a very modern question, ironically. But the reality is that it tells us the truth. That story, as Father Thomas says, is deadly serious. And if you don't understand that story, then so much of the rest of the life in Christ, the life of the church, is not going to make sense. You'll have to forgive me. I don't remember if it was in one of these videos already or in a recent sermon that I've mentioned this. I tend to repeat things anyway, so here we go. One of the things that it is useful to remember, that helps me with regard to remembering paradise, a place I've never been, is something that Father Patrick Henry Reardon mentioned to me. That when we read, and Father Pat, by the way, is on Ancient Faith Radio. His homilies are there. We're getting ready in our church here in about another week and a half or so to do a Bible study of his, using his Bible study on Job. Wonderful biblical scholar. But he mentions that, in that story, They took garments of skin and placed it over themselves. This is only one letter difference from garments of light. And you have the reason they knew they were naked was because they had been clothed with God's glory. And that really explains why Father Thomas will quote this hymn of the church that says, Adam was exiled from paradise through disobedience. He was driven from eternal bliss, deceived by the words of Eve. He sat naked and weeping before the gates of paradise. Let us hasten to enter the season of fasting. Let us carefully obey the gospel commands, that we may be made acceptable to Christ our God and regain our home in Eden. He sat naked and weeping before the gates of paradise. Of course, the story is that once they had taken the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they were they were cast out of paradise. But it's important to understand that this was not, in a sense, as commonly thought, that God was mad at them, that their disobedience, that's mentioned in the hymn, that the penalty was because God was then angry with them. I'm going to show you, I'm going to kick you out of the nice place, and now you've really got to work and suffer. But no, he didn't say, if you eat of this fruit, I'm going to kill you. He said, you will die. Now it's important to understand, they didn't die. They bite into the fruit. They didn't fall down physically dead. But what they had done was to unplug themselves from the life of God that they enjoyed before. The glory of God that kept them immortal was gone. They became mortal in that moment. And that has been the plague of mankind since that time, is that everyone dies. That there's the old joke, the thing about life is that nobody gets out alive. But you have this sense that now, because death reigns, as the writer of Hebrews says, you have those who through fear of death have committed all kinds of atrocities against one another, and that the devil has held us all captive through fear of death. And so, you have this sense in which now reality is different. We now find ourselves in a world that's temporary, in a world where everyone dies, in a world where you lose eventually everyone and everything, even your own breath. It's clearly not paradise. But there is a promise of a restoration. And it comes on the wood of a cross, where hanging on either side of Christ were two probably murderous thieves who were being executed for their crimes. And one of them, sort of famously, said, as the other one was making fun of him, at first he was joining in, and then it's the one on the right side, my right here, he spoke up. He came to himself. He said, don't you fear God? We deserve what we're getting. But this man, he's innocent. And then he turns to him and says, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. This is Saint Dismas. He has a name, the righteous thief. If you look on icons of all saints, you can usually see him. You can usually see him with like a cloth around his waist and a cross over his shoulder. And he's usually entering into paradise, the bosom of Abraham. You'll see Abraham there. And he'll enter in, because this is what Christ said. Today, you will be with me in paradise. How could that be today? Are they going to the Garden of Eden? Is that going to be? No. For us, paradise has been refashioned. Is that Christ will descend with Dismas, soon to be Saint Dismas, into Sheol, Hades, the place of the dead, a place of darkness and gloom and captivity, the place of shadows, and in the Greek mythology, in the shades, you become a shade of your former self, a disembodied soul, not your full self, ripped apart from how you were originally meant to be. Really, the exile is complete. Now you're not simply exiled from a garden of paradise. Now you're exiled from your own existence, your own full existence. And God saw, St. Athanasius says in his book on the Incarnation, God saw that his creation was going further and further down into disintegration, and he would have none of it. He was appalled. And so he descended to this world, and then even down further into the depths of death and Hades. And he, as we say on Pascha night, on those in the tombs, he bestowed life. His light is the life of men, as we say, as we hear that Pascha night from St. John's prologue. He made Hades and Sheol paradise for those who had been waiting for him. So this is why he was able to say to St. Dismas, today you will be with me in paradise. That's why when a soul departs from the body, if that soul has been united to Christ, has been waiting on Christ, has been, repenting in this life, it experiences, if it belongs to Christ, that presence of Christ as purification, as joy, as an anticipation of the fullness of life to come. Now, it's also for those who have run away from Christ, want nothing to have to do with him, don't want their existence to be defined by him, they don't want to be made into his image. That presence of Christ is an anticipation of torment as they await the resurrection. But they are being made to be like Christ. But this is what we say when we talk about a paradise that is coming. A paradise that is coming where now we find ourselves outside the gates of paradise. We've taken the knowledge of good and evil that Adam and Eve were not ready for. It's like giving a baby a hammer and expecting the baby to be able to not hurt themselves or other people or things with it. They were, brand new creations, and they blew it. And we take that same attempt at knowledge to be like God, and we continue to hurt one another and torture one another and provide chaos and all of this. In that sense, death is something of a mercy because it keeps us from becoming demons. I'm quoting some, by the way, from a podcast by Father Stephen DeYoung and Father Andrew Stephen Damick. It was a little commercial, I guess. Lord of the Spirits podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. And they really, mention this in one of their more recent podcasts, that this keeps us ultimately from becoming demons. But now we are promised a paradise, which we begin to live in function of now. We try, by God's grace, to make every interaction with other people paradise. To make this world as much as we can, and we never will completely until Christ returns, but to make it paradise. So, brothers and sisters, mourn the loss of paradise. Remember that we are not at home in this world, but that God has already fashioned and is refashioning both this world and us in the way that he has already begun to reclaim his paradise, and that we, by his grace and his mercy, would be a part of that. So God bless you, and Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow.